The water came over the spillway at 11:22 p.m. And I know that because my watch was the only thing in the house still keeping honest time. Everything else had been lying for 3 days. The clock on the microwave sat at a frozen green 4:17 like a thing that had died with its eyes open. The truck dash had gone dark when the grid dropped. And the little battery clock on the kitchen windowsill had run down to a slow stutter, the second hand twitching against the same notch over and over, like it was trying to climb a hill it couldn't crest. But my father's old field watch kept ticking on my wrist, the way it had ticked through 2 of his wars and most of my life. And when the dam's alarm finally screamed up the valley, I looked down at the dial in the dark and saw both hands stacked clean and certain. 11:22. That alarm wasn't supposed to be possible. I want you to understand that, because it's the whole reason the night went the way it did. The Hargrove Dam ran on the same dead grid as the rest of us. No power meant no horn. That wasn't hope talking, that was 20 years of knowing the machine. I'd told myself that for 3 days, lying awake in a house full of loaded rifles, the way you tell yourself a lot of comforting things when sleep won't come, and the dark outside the window is full of things that used to be your neighbors. The dam is dead. The horn can't sound. So when that noise rolled down off the ridge, that long, flat, industrial wail, the kind that comes from a horn the size of a car, a sound built to be heard 9 miles away through a storm, my first thought wasn't the flood. My first thought was that somebody had turned the power back on up there. Somebody alive. Somebody who'd walked into that gatehouse, found the sealed battery bank still holding its charge after 3 days of silence, and chosen, deliberately, with their own hand, to wake the valley up. And the only people left near that dam were the ones we'd been hiding from. I'm Wendell Carrow, 51 years old, and until about 2 weeks ago, I maintained the intake screens and the sluice gates for the river authority that owned that dam. I knew its bones. I knew the smell of the gatehouse and the sound a healthy turbine makes, and the way the whole arch breathes under load. Which is exactly why that alarm put ice in my chest instead of just adrenaline. A stranger would have heard a warning. I heard a hand. Before I tell you the rest, and there's a lot of rest, none of it easy, I want to say thank you to the folks who keep coming back to sit with these stories. And welcome to anyone hearing my voice for the first time. If grounded survival like this is your kind of thing, stay with the channel, leave a comment, and we'll keep going as long as there are stories worth telling. Now let me get back to that night, because the moment the horn started, my daughter was already standing in the hallway with her boots on. Her name is Pell, short for Penelope, which she's hated since she was old enough to say it out loud and hear how it didn't fit her. She was 16 that summer, all elbows and stubbornness, and a jaw she'd gotten from her mother. And in the 3 days since the world quit working, she'd gone quiet in a way that scared me more than crying would have. Pell crying, I knew how to handle. Pell silent, standing in a dark hallway with one hand flat against the wall, feeling the vibration through her palm the way I'd taught her to feel for a bad pump bearing that was new. And it told me she'd already crossed over into the place I lived, the place where you stop reacting and start calculating. "That's not the river," she said. Her voice was low and even. "That's a machine." "I know. You said the dam was dead." "I thought it was." She turned her head toward me in the dark, and even without light I could feel the weight of it. The question and the accusation folded together the way only a teenager can fold them. I watched her do the math I'd already done, the same brutal little equation. If the horn was running, something at Hargrove had power. And nothing that had power in our valley right now was friendly. We lived in a stilt frame house my grandfather built on the high shoulder of the Caulfield Valley. a long green trough cut by the Saw Fork River and capped at its north end by Hargrove Dam. The valley was maybe 9 miles end to end, a curving trough of pasture and corn and second-growth timber, with our county road running its spine and the river running alongside it like a tired old dog that had walked that path so long it didn't need a leash. 200 people, give or take, scattered across farms and a single small town called Renner's Mill that wasn't much more than a feed store, a clapboard church with a bell nobody rang anymore, and a gas station with one working pump and a Coke machine that had eaten my quarters since I was a boy. The outbreak hadn't come to us the way it came to cities. We watched it on the news first, the way you watch a hurricane 2 states away, telling yourself the mountains will break it up before it gets here, telling yourself geography is on your side. It came up the valley instead, slow and patient, riding in the back of a refrigerated produce truck that broke down outside Renner's Mill on a Tuesday. The driver had been bitten in the city and didn't know yet what he was turning into. By the time anybody understood, the gas station attendant and 2 of the Loomis kids had been bitten too. And the thing was loose among us, moving from house to house up the valley the way a grass fire moves when the wind's behind it. Here is what nobody tells you about the infected, the part the news never had the stomach to say plainly. They aren't fast, not most of them. They aren't clever. What makes them terrible is that they don't stop, and they don't make the noise a living thing makes. A man hunting you breathes hard. He curses when he stubs his foot. He gives himself away a dozen ways without meaning to, because a living body is a loud, leaky, honest thing. These didn't. They just came on, steady as water finding low ground. And they were quiet until they were close enough to touch you. I watched one of them stand in the Pruitt's driveway for half a day, perfectly still, swaying a little in the heat, until a screen door banged 2 houses down, and it turned and walked toward the sound, without ever seeming to decide to. They were drawn to noise the way a moth's drawn to a porch light, and just as mindless about it, and just as impossible to reason with. We had 3 working days of warning before the grid went down. I used them. I'm the kind of man who finds calm in a checklist and saves the grief for later, when there's time, when there's nothing left to do with my hands. I drained the rain barrels into clean drums, 50 gallons of water I'd never have to boil. I went down the road in the dark and siphoned every vehicle on the property, and 2 abandoned ones, into jerry cans. 18 gallons of gas plus what was already in the truck. And I labeled each can with a grease pencil, because a man who doesn't label his fuel ends up putting bad gas in a good engine at the worst possible moment. I carried the canned food and the dry goods down into the root cellar and counted it twice, the way my grandfather taught me to count anything that stood between his family and a hungry winter. And I wrote the count on the inside of the cellar door in pencil, so I'd always know without having to open every box. And I laid out the guns. I want to be honest about the guns, because too many of these stories make it sound like you can shoot your way out of anything, like a brave man with a rifle is a fortress unto himself. You can't, and he isn't. I had my grandfather's Remington 870, a pump shotgun worn smooth at the action from 60 years of his hands, and then mine, with a box and a half of buckshot 19 shells. And I knew it was 19 because I'd laid them out in 2 rows on the kitchen table and looked at them a long time. I had a Ruger 1022, a little rim-fire rifle, with about 300 rounds in a green ammo can, which sounds like a lot until you understand that a .22 won't reliably stop one of these things unless you put it through the eye at close range, and at close range you've already lost most of the fight. And I had a Smith & Wesson revolver, a .38 that had been my wife's, with 2 boxes of ammo and a memory in every cylinder. That was it. 60-some serious shells and a pile of little ones, for however long this lasted. Every shot was a decision. Every shot was noise, and noise was the one currency I couldn't afford to spend, because noise didn't just cost you the round, it called the next problem to your door. That was the arithmetic I lived in for 3 days. Water, fuel, food, shells, noise. So when the horn started screaming and I knew it would carry for miles, knew it would roll down the valley and into every flooded ditch and dark barn, and call every quiet, patient thing. Toward the one sound, in a silent world, I understood we had a problem that no amount of buckshot could solve. You don't shoot a flood. You don't shoot the dark. And you sure as hell don't shoot a sound that's already left the building. Get the bags, I told Pell. Real ones, not the practice run. She moved. That was the thing about Pell. Since her mother died 2 years back, she didn't argue when the situation was real. She'd argue your ear off about dishes and curfew and whether a 16-year-old needed to know how to bleed the air out of a fuel line at midnight. But real danger flipped a switch in her, the same one it flipped in me. And the arguing stopped and the hands started working. She grabbed the 2 packs we'd staged by the back door, food and water, and the .22 ammo split between them so that losing one bag wouldn't lose everything. And she settled the straps onto her shoulders and cinched them down without being told. And I felt that particular ache a father feels when he sees his child doing a thing he wishes she'd never had to learn. I stepped onto the porch with the shotgun and listened. The night was warm and close, the air thick with the green smell of August, and, under it, the sweeter rot smell that had crept into everything since the outbreak. A smell I'd stopped being able to name because naming it made it worse. The stars were out hard and bright the way they only get when every light for miles is dead. More stars than I'd seen since I was a boy. A careless spill of them over the black ridgeline. The horn was up the valley, north at the dam. And it kept on, flat and merciless, with that faint waver at the edge that big horns get when the sound bounces off the far ridge and comes back to meet itself. But underneath the horn, faint, I heard the other thing. The river. It had a new sound. 3 days of drought-low trickle, the saw fork reduced to a thread you could step across. And now it had a low, grinding voice. A sound like a heavy truck idling under the earth. Like the ground itself clearing its throat. The spillway was passing water it hadn't passed all summer. I felt it in my back teeth before I fully understood it, which meant the alarm wasn't lying about the flood either. I did the geometry in my head, the way I'd done it 100 times on the job, only never for real. Never with my daughter standing behind me with 2 bags on her back. Hargrove held back a reservoir 9 billion gallons deep. A black lake folded back into the mountains that most of the valley never even saw. If it failed, if that concrete arch let go, the valley would fill from the north end like a bathtub with the tap wide open, and the water would reach our high shoulder in something between 20 and 40 minutes. I'd run that calculation in a training course once, in a fluorescent-lit county building with bad coffee, and the instructor had said those numbers like they were a campfire story. Now they were a clock. We were maybe 100 feet above the river. That bought us time, not safety. The only sure ground was the East Ridge, a long climb up an old logging spur, 1,500 feet above the valley floor. True high ground, the kind of high water never reaches. But the road to the ridge ran north first, toward the dam, toward the horn. Dad. Pell was beside me now, close, her shoulder against my arm, the way she used to stand when she was small and a storm came up. Why would somebody turn the alarm on? I didn't have an answer she'd like, so I gave her the true one. To move us. An alarm sends people one direction, toward high ground, toward the ridge road. You think somebody wants us on that road? I think we don't get on that road blind." The horn cut off? It didn't fade. It didn't trail away the way a sound does when its power source weakens or its mechanism winds down. It stopped clean, mid-note, the way a sound stops when a hand pulls a switch there one instant, gone the next, leaving a hole in the night where it had been. And in the silence that rushed in behind it, sudden and ringing, I heard the river grinding louder than before, and I heard, much closer than I wanted, the soft drag of feet on gravel coming up our driveway. The alarm had already started doing its work. Something had heard it. Something was coming. Drawn up our long drive by a noise that had already stopped, following the memory of it the way they followed everything, patient and certain and silent now that the horn was dead. I put my hand on Pell's shoulder, just a touch, and we backed inside without a sound. And I eased the doors shut and turned the deadbolt the way you'd set down a sleeping baby. Slow, no click, my thumb on the bolt to feel for the moment it seated so I could stop before it snapped home loud. The lock slid into the frame with a whisper of oiled steel, and I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. Through the front window I counted them. 4. They came up the drive in that loose, unbothered line the infected always made, not together, not apart, just drawn the same direction by the same dead pull. The lead one had been a man in a mail carrier's uniform, the blue shirt gone black down the front, his bag still slung across his body like he'd been on his route when it took him. The light was nearly gone, just the stars shine and a smear of deeper dark where the trees stood. But I'd learned to read them by motion, by the wrongness in the way they carried their weight. The way a healthy man's walk has a spring to it, and theirs had none, just falling forward and catching themselves, over and over, gravity doing most of the work. None of these were the runners. I'd seen 2 runners in 3 days, and prayed not to see a third. These were the slow ones, the patient ones. Small mercy, I'd take it. "Cellar," I breathed. "Now." We had a plan for this, because I'm the kind of man who plans for the thing he hopes never happens. The root cellar under the back of the house had a second way out, a coal chute hatch my grandfather built into the back foundation in the days when the house ran on coal, a low square opening that came out into the dry creek bed behind the house. The idea was simple, the kind of simple a man can hold on to when his hands want to shake. Let them come to the front, slip out the back through the chute, be 300 yards gone into the dark before they ever understood the house was empty. But the river changed the plan, and it changed it in the time it took me to think it. The dry creek bed behind the house wasn't dry anymore. I could hear it through the back wall, a fast, cold hiss under the grinding of the river. The dam's release had backed water up every channel and gully in the valley, and that creek had been the first low ground to find. And it was filling. Our back door, our clean escape, was now a door opening onto a rising stream in the dark. I stood in the black kitchen with my daughter and my 19 shells, and I understood the trap for what it was. And the understanding sat in my stomach like a swallowed stone. Whoever turned that horn on hadn't just called the infected toward us. They'd timed it to the water. The valley was a funnel, and somebody had just kicked open the top of it and lit the fire at the bottom. "We can't go out the back," Pell whispered. "The creek." I heard it. "Then we're stuck." "No." I made myself say it level, the way I'd say it to a man at the bottom of a wet sluice with a cable around his leg. Panic is a luxury. It buys you nothing and costs you everything. We're early. That's different from stuck. The first body hit the front door. Not a knock they didn't knock. They didn't have it in them anymore. A lean, that slow, full weight pressing against the wood, sliding down it, testing it the way water tests a dam, looking without knowing it was looking for the give. The deadbolt held. The old hinges groaned a long, low complaint, and I felt the sound in my own jaw. I moved us to the cellar stairs and down into the deeper dark, one hand on Pell's pack strap, one on the rail, counting the steps by feel because I'd counted them 10,000 times. 12 down. I pulled the trapdoor closed above us, easing it into its frame, and the kitchen and the leaning thing at the front door went away behind an inch of oak. I sat my daughter against the cool stone of the foundation wall and crouched beside her with the shotgun across my knees, and we listened to 4 dead things learn the shape of our home above us. The cellar smelled of earth and old apples and the gun oil on my hands, and faintly, the cardboard and tin smell of the food I'd stacked along the far wall. It was cooler down there, 10 degrees cooler, the held breath of the ground. Pell was breathing too fast, shallow little pulls, the kind that lead to worse. I found her wrist in the dark and pressed 2 fingers to the inside of it, an old habit, counting her pulse against the steady tap of my father's watch, the way I'd count a pump's cycles against a stopwatch. And I held it there, saying nothing, just letting her feel my hand be steady, until her breathing slowed and found the rhythm of the watch. And the 2 beats her heart. The watch fell into something close to the same time. "Listen to me," I said, low, my mouth close to her ear so the sound wouldn't carry up through the boards. "The waters are clocked now. When it comes up the creek high enough, it'll spill into the cellar through that chute, right there." I tapped her hand and pointed it at the dark square of the coal hatch in the back wall, low to the floor. "We can't stay down here past that. But up there." I tipped my head at the ceiling, at the slow drag of feet that was working its way now from the front room into the kitchen. "We've got 4 of them learning the house. So we wait for one thing. We wait for the road." "What road?" "The ridge road. The horn moved everything that can walk toward the high end of the valley before it cut off. In 40 minutes, that road's going to be the most dangerous mile in the county, packed shoulder to shoulder with everything the noise pulled out of the dark. But right after the water comes up, before the next wave of them figures out we're here, there's a window. The water clears the low ground of the slow ones. They get tangled in it, knocked down, carried off. For a few minutes, the bottom of the valley is going to be empty of everything but us. That's when we move. And we don't move toward the ridge road. We move toward the river itself." She turned her head in the dark, and I felt her go still in that particular way she had when she was deciding whether I'd lost my mind. "You want to go toward the flood? I want to go to the one place nobody living or dead expects anybody to go. The maintenance causeway, the low service road that runs along the base of the dam, downstream side. In a real flood, it's underwater. But right now, with a partial release, it'll be ankle deep and falling, and it connects to the dam's east stair, and the east stair connects to the crest, and the crest connects to the ridge road from above. From behind whoever turned that horn on. I felt her work it, the gears turning, the same way I'd watch her work a math problem at the kitchen table, frowning at a point in space. "You want to come at them from the top," she said slowly. "From the dam. I want to come at them from a direction they didn't build their trap to cover. And I want to find out who they are before they find us." She was quiet a moment. Above us, something heavy went over a kitchen chair, knocked sideways, the legs scraping the linoleum, and the slow drag of feet crossed the floor directly over our heads, close enough that I could track the thing by the creak of the boards. And a thin trickle of dust and old cobweb sifted down between the planks into the gray-black air of the cellar and settled on my arm. Pell pressed her own hand over her mouth to hold the sound in, and I felt her whole body lock up tight beside me, and we waited, the two of us, while a thing that used to be a person stood directly above us, not knowing we were there. While we waited, I'll tell you the thing I hadn't told her yet, the thing I'd been carrying since the horn first sounded, turning it over in the dark. I knew that dam's control system. I hadn't just maintained the screens and the gates. I'd been there 15 years back when they'd modernized the Gatehouse, and I'd helped the contractors pull cable and mount panels, fetching and carrying and learning more than they probably meant to teach me. The alarm horn ran off a dedicated battery bank in the Gatehouse, a separate sealed lead-acid system, walled off in its own little room, kept on a trickle charge precisely so it could warn the valley even if the grid died and the turbines stopped and the whole world went dark. That was good engineering. That was a man named Thoreau Vance, the dam's old chief operator, a quiet, careful Cajun who'd come up north for the work 40 years ago and never lost the music in his voice, doing his job right 20 years ago so that strangers he'd never meet might get a warning some terrible night in the future. But that horn did not turn itself on. It had two triggers. One was automatic, tied to the water level sensors in the reservoir. If the lake rose past a flood threshold, the horn would sound on its own and keep sounding until the water dropped back below the line. The other was manual. A big mushroom button in the control room, the kind you held down with your hand. And here was the thing that had been gnawing at me in the dark. If the water had tripped it, the horn would have run until the water dropped. It would not have stopped clean mid-note, the way this one had. The water hadn't dropped. I could still hear it grinding through the spillway, rising in the creek behind us. The automatic trigger would still be holding the horn on. Somebody had pulled that switch by hand. And then somebody had pushed it back, which meant there was a living person standing inside the Hargrove Gatehouse right now with a working battery bank, a view of the whole valley, and a reason to be moving us like cattle. And the only reason I could think of for sounding a flood alarm and then killing it for warning people toward high ground in a flood, and then going silent, was that you wanted them moving, all of them, in one direction, onto one road, where you could see them, where you could meet them, where you could choose. I didn't know yet what kind of person does that. I'd find out before the night was through. But sitting in that cellar, with the dust still settling on my arm, holding my daughter's wrist and counting the slow drumbeat of feet above us, I made myself a promise I've kept through worse since. Whatever I found at the top of that dam, Pell was coming out the other side of it. Everything else, the dam, the valley, my own neck was negotiable. That one thing was not. The water reached the cellar at 11:51. I heard it before I felt it. A soft, fast hiss, gathering, as the rising creek finally crested the lip of the coal chute and began pouring down the inside of the back foundation wall in a thin spreading sheet, the sound of it changing as it found the floor, from a hiss to a low gurgle to the steady fill of moving water in a closed space. Cold valley water, smelling of mud and crushed weeds and something mineral and old. The smell of the river bottom turned up into the air. It found my boots in under a minute, a cold line creeping up over the leather and soaking through to my socks. By the count of my father's watch, the water rose an inch every 90 seconds, steady, no surge. I held my hand flat against the stone wall and felt the cold of it climb. That gave me a number, and a number gave me a plan. And a plan was the only thing standing between me and the panic I couldn't afford. "It's coming up," Pell whispered. "On schedule." I stood, slow, and my knees told me how long I'd been crouched in the cold and the damp. 2 sharp complaints I ignored. Listen above us. We both went still and listened past the gurgle of the water. The drag of feet on the floorboards had thinned. There'd been 4 sets, overlapping, a slow shuffle from room to room. Now there were maybe 3, then I lost 1, and there were 2. And the quality of the movement had changed slower, more aimless, the patient certainty draining out of it. The water was reaching the ground floor now, sheeting in under the front door and up through the floor vents. And the infected didn't like moving water any better than they liked anything else that wasn't a sound to follow. It confused them, pulled at their legs, scattered the loose thread of logic that held them on a scent. I'd watched 2 of them get caught in a flooded roadside ditch on the first day and simply stop, standing in the current up to their thighs like a pair of fence posts somebody had forgotten, until the water rose enough to take them off their feet and carry them away. And they hadn't fought it, hadn't flailed, just gone under and gone on downstream, still facing the way they'd been pointed. That was the window. The water that was about to drive us out of the cellar was the same water that was about to clear the path above. I had to spend it exactly right. And I had to spend it now. Because every inch of water that bought us cover up top was an inch closer to the cellar becoming a stone box full of cold black water with my daughter and me inside it. When I open the trap, I said, we go up fast and we go for the front door because the front's downhill. The water will be deepest and slowest moving there, and the slow ones will be tangled up in it. We do not shoot unless one of them is between us and the door, and there's no way around. You understand me? Every shell I fire is a dinner bell that rings for a mile. Quiet is the whole game. Quiet is the whole game, she repeated. It was a thing I'd said to her 1,000 times, leaning over a stripped-down pump in the shop, that you let the machine tell you what's wrong if you just shut your mouth and listen for it. She'd taken it and turned it into our password for the end of the world, the thing we said to each other when there was nothing else worth saying. I went up the cellar stairs with the shotgun held low and ready, water already lapping at the bottom 2 steps behind me. And I put my shoulder to the underside of the trap door and lifted it an inch. The kitchen was a black mirror. 6 inches of water across the whole floor, rising, the surface of it catching what little light there was and throwing it back, so that the room seemed to float on a sheet of moving darkness. 2 infected stood in it, swaying, one over by the overturned table and one near the mouth of the hallway, both with that slack, head-up, listening stillness they got when the trail had gone cold and they were waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for the next sound to tell them where to go. I couldn't see the other 2. The mail carrier and 1 more had been at the front door. I had to hope, and hope is a thin thing to build on, that the water had moved them along, floated them off their feet, carried them down off the porch. I lifted the trap the rest of the way, slow, both hands, and the hinge breathed but didn't squeal, because I'd oiled it 3 days ago. 1 item on a checklist that had felt half paranoid at the time and now felt like the smartest thing I'd ever done with a can of 3-in-1. We came up into the cold water in our socks. We'd tied our boots around our necks by the laces, because boots in standing water make a slap and a suck with every step, and bare feet don't. And the cold of the water hit me to the bone, and I let it. Kept my face still, kept moving. Pell came up behind me with a hand fisted hard in the back of my jacket, her grip a small, fierce anchor. We waited for the front door, the water dragging cold at our shins, every step placed slow to keep from setting up a wave. And the swaying infected by the table turned its ruined face toward the soft sound of our waiting, the way a sunflower turns, blind and certain. We made the front door. I'd left it deadbolted, and now I had to open it. And that meant noise, there was no oiling my way out of a turning deadbolt. I put my thumb and finger on it and turned it as slow as I could bear, and it gave a soft metal clack as the bolt cleared the strike. And in that drowned, ringing silence, the small sound landed like a hammer on an anvil. The infected by the table came for us. Not fast, but straight, no wandering now, locked on, wading toward us through the black water, with its arms coming up. Out, I breathed, and put my hand flat between Pell's shoulder blades, and pushed her through the door ahead of me, out onto the porch where the water ran deeper and faster. And I backed out after her with the shotgun up in the muzzle on the thing as it reached the doorway. It came into the door frame close enough that I could smell it over the river smell, that wet copper, spoiled meat stink that gets into the back of your throat and stays there, that I will carry to my grave. I did not fire. I will tell you that I wanted to, that every animal part of me wanted the noise and the flash and the thing gone. But I drove the butt of the shotgun forward instead, hard, into the bridge of its nose, the way you'd swing a maul at a wedge, putting my hips into it. And the wood met bone with a flat crack, and the thing went down sideways into the black water. And I pulled the door shut on it, and we went off the porch into the flood, and waited hard for the rise of the gravel driveway, where the water shallowed. Behind us, I never heard it come back up. Maybe the water held it down. Maybe the blow had done more than I'd meant it to. I didn't look back to check. Looking back is how you trip, how you lose your footing in moving water in the dark, how you turn a clean escape into a drowning. And I'd promised myself I'd get my daughter out the other side. So I kept my eyes forward and my feet under me, and I climbed. We made the top of the drive, the gravel rise where the county road ran along the spine of the valley, the water falling away behind us to ankle deep and then to nothing. And there, for the first time, I saw the whole valley laid out below us in the failing starlight, and the sight of it stopped me cold in the road. The Saw Fork had become a lake, not a wall of water, not the Hollywood flood, the curling brown wave that eats a town in a single shot. The dam hadn't failed not yet, and I held on to that not yet like a rope. This was a controlled release gone wide, or a partial breach. The river spreading slow and silent and patient across the floor of the valley, swallowing the low pastures and the fence lines and the bottom road and the Loomis place where the boys had gotten bitten. The water moving with a terrible patience that was, I realized, exactly the patience of the infected finding the low ground, filling it, taking its time, because it had all the time in the world. The starlight lay across it in a long broken sheet. And up at the north end of the valley, dark against the darker mass of the ridge, sat Hargrove Dam, 400 feet of concrete arch holding back the black. And in the gatehouse at its eastern end, one window glowed. A light, steady, yellow-white, electric. The only working light in 9 miles of dead valley. Somebody was home. There, Pell said, low, following my eyes. Water dripped off her in the starlight. That's where the horn came from. That's where everything's coming from. The road north toward the dam was the high ground, the one strip of dry the water hadn't taken. A pale ribbon running up the spine of the drowned valley, and it was already filling with motion. Dark shapes, dozens of them, drawn up out of the flooded farms by the memory of that horn, waiting and stumbling and falling and rising and stumbling on, all of them moving the same direction, toward the high north end, toward the dam, like iron filings dragged toward a magnet they couldn't see. The flood was flushing them out of every low barn and ditch and field, and the only dry path led north, and so north they went. a slow river of the dead running counter to the slow lake of the water. And we needed to go the same direction. This is the part where I have to tell you about Sublett, because he found us on that road. And nothing after that went the way I planned. We'd gone maybe half a mile north, keeping off the open road, and to the brush on the uphill eastern side, moving when the shapes on the road moved and freezing flat against the dark when they froze, reading the herd the way you'd read weather. I had us spaced me ahead. Pell a body length back, both of us low, and a voice came out of the dark to our right, from a drainage culvert under a farm lane, low and even and unhurried. "You're the dam man, Carrow." I had the shotgun up and on the sound before the second word was out of his mouth, my whole body turning toward it. A man rose up out of the mouth of the culvert with his empty hands held out and open, palms toward me. And even in the starlight, I could see he'd done it slow on purpose, telegraphing every inch of the movement, the way a man does when he knows exactly how close he is to getting shot and means to talk his way out of it. He was maybe 40, lean, hard-used, in a sheriff's department jacket with the embroidered patch torn off the shoulder, leaving a darker patch of unfaded fabric where it had been. A pistol rode on his hip in a department holster, the strap snapped down over it, his hand nowhere near it. "Easy," he said, his voice still level, a flat plains voice with the cop's trained calm in it. "I've been watching this road the better part of an hour. You two are the only ones who came up it smart. Everybody else came up it like cattle." He tipped his head an inch toward the shuffling shapes out on the pale road. "Like them." "Who are you?" "Deputy was. Name's Orrin Sublett. I worked Renner's Mill out of the county seat back when there was a county." His eyes moved to Pell, took in the 2 bags and the wet clothes, came back to me and the shotgun and the bare feet. "You figured out the horn was a draw. Good. Most folks didn't. Most folks heard a flood alarm and did exactly what a flood alarm tells a man to do." "You know who's up there?" Something crossed his face, a flicker I read as grief and would later read different. "I know it's not who it should be." That stopped me, the same way the clean cut off of the horn had stopped me. Thoreau Vance ran that dam. 40 years. He'd cut off his own hand before he'd flood this valley on purpose. "Vance is up there," Sublett said. "I don't think he's the one running it anymore. Here is where I made my first real mistake, and I want to be honest about it. Lay it out plain, because the whole rest of the night turned on it, and the least I can do is not hide it from you. I trusted Sublett. Not all the way. I kept the shotgun up another few seconds, and I never quite let my eyes leave his hands, but I trusted him enough. He had a bad-shaped hole in his jacket and a bad-shaped steadiness in his manner that fitted, and he had information I didn't, and he'd known my name, and a man knowing your name in the dark does something to your guard, whether you want it to or not. And I was a 51-year-old man standing in a drowning valley with a 16-year-old daughter, 19 shotgun shells and bare feet, and the offer of a 4th gun and a guide who knew the high ground felt, in that moment, like a gift handed down out of the dark. What would you have done out there on that road, water rising behind you, the dead walking past in the dark not 40 feet off? I've turned it over 1,000 nights since. Tell me down in the comments, honestly, because I'm still not certain there was a right answer to find. I let the shotgun's muzzle drop, slow to low ready. Then you're going to tell me everything you know, and we're going to figure out how to get up this road without joining the cattle. Not up the road, Sublett said. Through. There's only one way up to that dam that the road herd doesn't crowd. And you already know what it is, because I'd bet you walked it every morning for 20 years. The service causeway. The service causeway. Base of the dam, downstream side, east stair. He almost smiled, just a tightening at the corner of his mouth. I told the others to go find the dam man. Looks like the dam man found me first. I should have asked who the others were. The word sat right there in the open and I let it pass. That was the second mistake. Smaller than the first, but it grew teeth later. And it cost more than the first did before the night was through. We moved together after that, the three of us, off the road and along the brushy eastern slope above the rising water, working north toward the dark bulk of Hargrove. Sublett moved like a man who knew how to be hunted low, quiet, choosing his footing, pausing at the edge of cover to read the open ground before he crossed it. He carried the deputy's Glock and 2 spare magazines on his belt. Call it 40-some rounds of 9mm, real stopping power. The kind of round that would actually put one of these things down with a center mass hit, never mind a headshot, where my rimfire would just make holes and noise. And he carried those magazines the way I carried my 19 shells, like he'd counted them, like he knew the exact number and the number wasn't enough. A man who counts his ammunition has been somewhere bad and means not to go back unprepared. I respected that. I also filed it away, the way I filed everything that night, in a part of my mind that never quite stopped working the problem. As we worked north, the water kept rising on our left, a black sheet creeping up the slope toward us, and the road herd kept thickening on our right, more shapes joining it out of the drowned fields, and Sublett told me what he knew in short, flat cop sentences, eyes always moving. 11 days ago, when the outbreak first hit Renner's Mill, a man named Calvin Rowe had taken over the gas station and the feed store and the church, and he'd called it order. Rowe was a local, ran a towing and salvage outfit out on the county highway, had a yard full of dead cars and a CB radio in every truck, and a following of men who liked the way he talked, the way he made being mean sound like being strong. When the grid went down, Rowe had figured out faster than anybody that whoever held the fuel in the high ground held the valley, and the highest, strongest ground in the valley, with its own sealed power and a 100-mile view and walls a foot of buckshot couldn't scratch, was Hargrove Dam. Rowe took the dam 4 days ago, Sublett said. Vance and his crew were holed up in the Gatehouse, riding it out, doing it smart. Rowe's people came up the crest road with deer rifles. Vance let them in. He paused at the edge of a fence line, scanned the dark, moved on. Didn't have a choice. They had his girl. Took her down in the mill the first week and kept her, and let Vance know they had her. So Vance opened the door. Rowe's been running things from up there ever since. The horn, the release, that's all him. He's not flooding this valley by accident, Carrow. He's draining the low ground on purpose, and he knows exactly what he's doing. Why would any man flood out the only farms left standing? That's food. That's seed. That's everything anybody'd need to make it to spring. Sublett looked at me, and in the starlight, his eyes had a flat shine like wet stone. Because Rowe doesn't want farms. Rowe wants a moat. He floods the valley floor, the water carries off the infected and the holdouts both. Takes the problem and the witnesses in one rinse. And what's left when the water settles is one dam, one piece of high ground, one man holding it, and everybody who managed to survive owing him their lives and their next meal. He's not trying to survive the end of the world. He's trying to be king of what's left of it. The dam's the castle, the flood's the wall, and everybody who comes crawling up to the gate after tonight comes on his terms or not at all. It was insane. I want to say that plainly. It was the thinking of a man who'd lost some essential thing. But it was also, I understood as I walked, exactly the kind of cold, patient cruelty that Horn had been engineered, all unknowing, to serve. Move the herd, move the people, sound the alarm, and let the valley sort itself into the drowned and the dependent. And the alarm tonight, The one that cut off clean? Final sweep the way I read it. Sublett's jaw worked. He runs the horn. The last holdouts who've been hiding 3 days panic and break for high ground, the way you're supposed to in a flood. The herd follows the noise and funnels up the only dry road. And Rowe's men sit up on that crest in the dark with rifles and a clear field of fire and a hot meal. And they pick off whoever they feel like picking off. And they let the water and the herd take the rest. By morning, there's not a living soul left in this valley who isn't up on that dam, on his side, eating his food, sleeping behind his wall. He stopped and looked at me full on. I've watched it happen to 3 families already from down here in the dark, and I couldn't do a thing about it from the ground. That's why I need a man who knows the inside of that dam. The way in that isn't the front gate. So that was the shape of it, not a flood. A purge with an engineer's discipline behind it. A man using a piece of public safety infrastructure to murder a valley clean and call himself a king over the rinse water. And I was the one man left alive who knew the inside of the machine Rowe had stolen. I'll be honest about how that landed on me, because the storytellers who pretend they felt brave in moments like that are lying to you. And I won't. I felt sick. I felt the cold all the way through. I'd walked my daughter straight into the gravity well of exactly the kind of man I'd spent 3 days hiding her from. And now the way out the bottom of the valley was a lake. And the way over the top ran through a dam held by armed men who were drowning the county on purpose and would shoot anything that climbed toward them in the dark. But underneath the sick feeling, something else settled in, cold and useful. The same thing that settles in me when a pump's failing and the water's rising in the wet well, and panic is the one tool that's no good to anybody. I knew that dam. I knew it better than Calvin Rowe ever would if he sat in that gatehouse for 10 years. I'd spent 20 years inside its concrete arteries, its access tunnels and its cable runs and its gate galleries. And a man who knows the inside of the machine the enemy is standing on top of is never, ever as helpless as he looks, standing in the dark at the bottom of it. We reached the base of the dam a little after midnight. Hargrove up close is a thing that doesn't fit in your eye all at once. You crane your neck, and it just keeps going up. A concrete arch 400 feet across and 190 feet tall, curved hard against the weight of 9 billion gallons. Its downstream face streaked with old water stains and orange rust. Weep where the rebar wept through. The whole vast structure humming faintly with the pressure it held back. A hum you felt in your chest before you ever heard it. At its base ran the service causeway, a narrow concrete road along the downstream toe of the dam. And just as Sublett had said, the partial release had flooded it ankle deep, cold water sheeting fast across our feet and falling now, dropping as the release eased off and the water level steadied. Above us, the dam's crest road carried lights, moving lights, flashlight beams swinging in the dark, men patrolling the top edge of the world. And the gatehouse at the east end still showed its one steady electric window, a warm yellow square hanging in all that black. Up there was Rowe. Up there was Vance, alive and broken, and Vance's daughter held somewhere as a leash, and whatever cold kingdom Rowe was building out of drowned farms. And the only way up to it from the causeway was the east stair, a steel-grated switchback bolted to the downstream face, climbing 190 feet in the dark, exposed to anybody on that crest with a flashlight and a rifle. "The stair's covered," I said, looking up at it, the spray off the falling release misting my face. "They'll see us the whole way up." "Not all of it." Sublett crouched low at the foot of the stair, in the cold spray, and pointed up with 2 fingers. First 60 feet are in the shadow of the Spillway buttress, They can't see down into that from the crest. The angle's wrong. Above that, you're in the open for maybe 40 feet before the stair ducks in behind the Gatehouse foundation. That 40 feet? You're praying. Pell spoke for the first time in a long while, her voice low and clear. Or we wait for the patrol to make a pass, and we run the 40 feet between sweeps in the gap. Sublett looked at her, and something moved across his face that I read at the time as approval. Or that. I crouched between them in the cold, sheeting water at the foot of my old workplace, and I put my hand flat against the concrete to steady myself. And I felt the dam. And I want to tell you about that hum. Because it's the thing that saved us, and the thing that should have warned me hours sooner than it did. A dam under normal load hums steady. A long, even, almost musical note. The sound of immense force held in perfect balance. The water pushing and the concrete pushing back. A stalemate as old as the structure. I knew that note. I'd fallen asleep to it on overnight shifts. This wasn't that note. There was a tremor riding under it. A low, irregular shudder I felt come up through my palm and into the bones of my arm, a stutter in the structure's heartbeat. And I knew that feeling too, because I'd felt it exactly once before, years back, during a scheduled test of the emergency bottom outlet gates, the big, low valves deep in the base of the dam that can dump the reservoir fast when there's an emergency, when you need to drop the lake quick to keep the whole thing from going. That tremor meant the bottom outlets were partway open and the flow through them was rough. Cavitating, the engineers call it. Water moving so fast through a narrow throat that it tears itself into vapor and then slams back into liquid against the steel, over and over. Thousands of times a second invisible hammer blows, each one tiny, all of them together a force that, given enough hours, will chew clean through the throat of a sluice and start eating the concrete around it from the inside out. Rowe wasn't running a controlled release. A controlled release runs through the spillway gates up top, the way the dam was designed to shed water, gentle and managed. Rowe was running the bottom outlets hard, wide open, dumping the lake from the base to drain the valley fast, and he either didn't know or didn't care that he was beating the guts of the dam to death to do it. Every minute that tremor ran, the throat of those outlets got a little more chewed, the cavitation gnawing deeper, and a dam doesn't fail where you can see it. It fails from the inside, quiet, until the moment it isn't quiet anymore. Sublett, I said very low. Rowe's not just flooding the valley, he's killing the dam. That tremor, feel it? He's run the bottom outlet so hard he started cavitating the throat. You hear a hammer in there. That's water tearing concrete apart from the inside. If that throat goes, it won't be a release anymore. The pressure finds the weak spot, and the whole arch lets go at once. Sublett went very still, his hand flat on the concrete now too, feeling for it. How long? I don't know. Hours, maybe less. Depends how long he's been running them wide open and how bad the throat's already chewed. I looked up the dark, streaked face of the dam, up at that one warm-lit window, where a man was draining a valley into a grave, to build himself a throne and tearing out the foundation of his own castle to do it. And never feeling the hammer under his feet, because he didn't know what the hum was supposed to sound like. He's standing on a bomb, and he doesn't even know it's lit. And that changed everything. Because up to that moment, my plan had been small and selfish and clean. And I'm not ashamed of it, a father's plan. Get up the stair. Find a way over the crest behind Rowe's men. Get my daughter onto the ridge road and gone into the high country, and let Calvin Rowe have his drowned kingdom and his cold morning. The valley wasn't my problem. My daughter was my problem. We'd take the high ground and the dawn and we'd walk away. But if the dam went, the ridge road didn't matter. 9 billion gallons through a full breach wouldn't be a slow-rising lake. It would be a surge, a moving wall, and it would take the whole lower valley in minutes and run up every draw and hollow and side cut 40 feet higher than any release ever could. Every infected on the road herd gone in the first wave. Every living holdout still fleeing toward high ground, caught and drowned. Vance's daughter in the Gatehouse, gone when the arch came apart under her. And maybe, if the surge ran high enough, up the east draw where the logging spur climbed, Pell and me too. Caught on the wrong shoulder of the wrong ridge with nowhere left above us. So I had a choice, standing in that cold water. And it was the choice the whole night turned on. I could try to get my daughter up and over and out, and pray the dam held until dawn, until we were high enough and far enough that it didn't matter. A father's gamble, with my daughter's life as the stake and a dying machine as the dealer. Or I could go up into the Gatehouse, into the heart of Roe's stolen kingdom, and shut those bottom outlets down before they finished eating the throat, which meant getting into the control room, past Roe and his men with their rifles, and operating a system I hadn't laid hands on in 2 years, in the dark, from memory, while people who'd murder a valley for a moat tried to stop me. I crouched in the spray with my daughter's wet hand finding my arm in the dark, and I made the choice. I have to get into the control room, I said. Not to escape past it, to shut the outlets. If I don't, none of the rest matters. Pell's grip tightened on my arm, hard. Dad, if those outlets keep running the way they're running, the dam fails before morning. And if it fails, there's no high ground close enough. Not the ridge. Not anywhere within 30 miles downstream of this thing. I looked at Sublett, at the dark shape of him crouched in the spray. You want past Roe. I want into the control room. Same stair, same patrol, same 40 feet of praying. We go up together that far. Sublett was quiet a moment, longer than a quiet ought to be. Then he said the thing that should have been my warning, and wasn't, because I was busy with valves and water and the inside of a machine. The control room, he said slowly, is where Roe stays. It's the warmest room with the best view and the only working light. You go in there, Carrow. You're not getting to a valve in peace. You're getting to Roe. Then I get to Roe. I want you to hear how foolish that sounds, said flat and plain like that. By a 51-year-old man who'd spent his life pulling weeds and trash off intake screens and greasing gate stems. But I'd done the geometry, and the geometry didn't care about my resume or my fear. The math was simple and merciless. The dam was dying. I was the only man within 9 miles who knew how to keep it alive long enough for morning. My daughter was inside the blast radius of the thing if it let go. There was no version of that night where I walked away from that valve and lived with myself afterward. And a man who can't live with himself isn't much use to his daughter anyway. We went up the stair in the dark. I won't draw out the climb, but I'll tell you the feel of it. The steel grating bit cold and sharp into the soles of our bare feet, every tread a small pain. The spray off the falling release soaked us through to the waist within the first 30 feet. Cold mountain water that sucked the warmth out of us, and we climbed up out of it into a wind that pushed at the structure, and the dam hummed and shuddered against our right shoulders the whole way. That bad hammer tremor coming up and through the concrete and into our bodies, a constant reminder of the clock I couldn't see ticking down inside the throat below us. 60 feet in the shadow of the buttress, moving steady, one hand on the cold pipe rail. Pell ahead of me where I could watch her, Sublett behind. Then the open 40. We stopped at the edge of the shadow, the 3 of us pressed flat to the cold streaked concrete. and watched the patrol on the crest above. Two men, flashlights, moving together along the crest road, sweeping the beams down the downstream face every couple of minutes in a lazy, bored arc. Men who'd been doing this for hours and expected nothing. I timed them on my father's watch, holding the dial up close in the dark. 90 seconds out to the far end of the crest, 90 seconds back. We had a window of about a minute when their beams were swinging at the far end, away from us. On my mark, I breathed, my mouth at Pell's ear, then turned and gave it to Sublett the same way. We don't stop on the open stretch, no matter what. We don't look up at the lights. A face turns toward a flashlight, and the light catches it. That's how they see you. We move, we get in behind the Gatehouse foundation, and we go still. Pell, you're first, you're fastest. I'm behind you. Sublett brings up the rear. The patrol beams swept past below us and started their slow walk to the far end of the crest. Go. We went up the open 40 feet of steel stair in the dark. 3 shadows climbing the downstream face of a dam 140 feet above a drowning valley. And I kept my eyes on Pell's back, and my hand light on the rail, and my breath shallow and even. And we made the cover of the Gatehouse foundation, just as the patrol's lights started their walk back. And we pressed ourselves into the cold concrete corner where the foundation met the stair. Then we went absolutely still. A flashlight beam swept across the stair below us, across the very steel where our bare feet had been 10 seconds before, lingered, moved on. We'd made it onto the dam. The Gatehouse at Hargrove sits on the crest at the east abutment, a squat, flat-roofed concrete building, ugly and honest, with a great alarm horn mounted on its roof and the battery room and the control room inside, and a single steel access door on the crest side that I had a key to in a desk drawer back at a house that was now 100 feet under cold black water. But there was another way in. And I knew it the way I knew the back of my own hand, because I'd used it 1,000 times. On the downstream side of the Gatehouse, low, set into the foundation, there was a maintenance hatch for the cable runs, a steel plate, latched but not locked. Because who in God's name breaks into the bowels of a dam, and it opened straight into the battery room? From the battery room, an interior door led to the control room. I told Sublett the layout in whispers, pressed into the cold concrete corner. He listened, nodding slow. And then he said the thing I should have caught. The third small steer. The one that finally made the back of my neck prickle. How many of Roe's men inside? I don't know. I can't see in. Vance would know. Vance is in there, and Vance knows where every one of them sleeps and stands. Sublett's voice was very even, very reasonable. When you get into that control room, you get Vance to you first. Vance knows the count, knows the layout, knows where Roe keeps his girl. Vance is the key to the whole thing. You get to Vance before you do anything else. It was good tactics. It was the kind of thing a smart man says. It was also the third time he'd steered us, gently, with reasons, toward one specific person toward Vance. And it was the first time I really heard the pattern under it. A small, cold note out of tune with the rest. But the patrol was coming back, and the dam was shuddering under my hand, and my daughter was 140 feet up the face of a dying machine in the dark. And I did not have the luxury of stopping to chase a feeling. So I filed it, the way I'd filed the counted ammunition and the unasked question, in that part of my mind that never stopped working. And I kept moving. We found the maintenance hatch right where my hands remembered it, low on the downstream wall of the Gatehouse, a steel plate secured with a simple over-center latch, no padlock, no alarm. I worked the latch with my fingers, slow, feeling for the give, and eased the hatch open into a darkness that breathed out at us warm and close and smelling of acid and warm electronics the battery room, the sealed bank that ran the alarm horn, glowing faint in the dark with the little green and amber charge lights of a system that Thoreau Vance had built right 20 years ago. And that was still, after 3 days of dead grid, doing its quiet job in the black while better men than Calvin Rowe died in the water below. We went in one at a time, into the warm, acid dark, ducking through the low hatch, Pell in the middle, Sublett behind her, me first with the Glock. I'd be honest, I didn't have. Not yet. Just the shotgun slung across my chest. I pulled the hatch nearly closed behind us, leaving it cracked an inch against the cold. Ahead of us, under the interior door to the control room, ran a thin, hard line of electric light. The first real light I'd seen in 3 days that wasn't a flashlight or a flame. And through that door, low and muffled, I could hear voices. I crept across the battery room toward the door, feeling my way past the warm bulk of the battery racks, the charge lights painting little green ghosts on my hands. And I put my ear to the cold steel and listened. There were 3 voices. One was rough and certain and never seemed to stop talking. A man who used words the way some men use their fists, to fill a room and leave no space for anybody else. Calvin Rowe, I'd have put my life on it. One was old and tired and worn down to nothing, answering in short, flat words with long silences between them. And under the tiredness, I could hear, even through the door, the faint Cajun music that 40 years up north had never quite worn out of it. Thoreau Vance, the dam's true keeper, alive and broken in the heart of his stolen machine. And the third voice, the one that turned my blood to ice water there in the warm acid dark, was a voice I'd been listening to for the last hour out on a dark road and a dark stair. It was Sublett's voice, coming from inside the control room, from a radio. On the causeway by now, maybe in the Gatehouse, the radio Sublett was saying, tinny and flat through a cheap speaker. I fed him the whole story top to bottom, the flood, the moat, the king of the valley speech. He bought every word. He thinks he's coming up there to save your dam, Calvin. He'll walk right into your control room and do exactly what you need done. Just don't let your boys put one in him before he closes those outlets. He's the only one left in this whole valley, who knows how. And Vance won't do it for you, no matter what you hold over him. I turned around very slowly in the dark. The Sublett standing behind my daughter in the deputy's jacket with the torn-off patch, with his counted magazines and his cop's calm and his 3 gentle steers, was already raising his Glock out of its holster. And he wasn't pointing it at the door. He was pointing it at me. "Easy," he said. The same flat, even voice he'd used in the culvert, the same reasonable steadiness, only now I heard it for what it was. "Nobody has to get hurt, Carrow. Just take your hand off that shotgun, nice and slow." I'll tell you exactly what went through my head in that half-second, because it's the kind of lesson you only get to learn once and live. Sublett wasn't a deputy who'd lost his department to the end of the world. He was Rowe's man, and probably had been since before the grid dropped. The voice on the radio in the control room was the real Sublett, or another of Rowe's men using his name. It didn't matter which reporting up the line that the bait had been taken whole. The man in front of me had been sent down that road for one purpose, to find the dam man, the one piece Rowe needed and couldn't make. Because Rowe knew the bottom outlets were chewing his dam apart. He could feel something was wrong, even if he didn't understand what. He couldn't fix it himself, and Vance wouldn't. And so Rowe had set a trap baited with the one thing on earth that would make a careful, frightened man climb 190 feet of dying dam in the dark on his own 2 bare feet, his own competence and his own fear for the valley below. They didn't need to capture me. A captured man fights, sulks, sabotages. They needed me to volunteer, to come up that stair believing it was my idea, my mission, my engineering, and my conscience. And I'd done it perfectly. I'd walked up the trap explaining the mechanism of it out loud to the man holding the leash. The shotgun was across my chest on its sling, muzzle down. His pistol was up and on me from 6 feet. And my daughter was half between us, off to his left, close, too close. There was no version of grabbing for the 870 that didn't put Pell in the line of a panicked man's fire. I'd known that the instant I turned and saw the geometry of it. And he'd known it before I did. That was why he'd kept her close the whole climb, why he'd put himself behind her on the stair, why he'd looked at her with that thing I'd misread as approval. The detail I'd noted and respected back on the road, a man who keeps the child near him in danger, hadn't been protectiveness. It had been a hostage held so loosely, so naturally, that I'd never once seen the leash for what it was. "Take your hand off it," he said again, calm as still water. "Set it down on the floor." So here was the choice, the real one. And I want you to sit in it with me a second, because it was the choice the whole night had been building toward, and there was no clean way through. If I gave up the shotgun, we belonged to Roe. He'd march us into that control room, hold Pell over me the exact same way he held Vance's girl over Vance, and use me to nurse his dying dam along, while he finished draining the valley into a grave. My competence, the thing I'd been quietly proud of my whole working life, the thing that let me oil the hinge and count the shells and read the cavitation in the throat, would become his tool. My daughter would become his leash. And I'd spend whatever was left of my life with a wrench in my hand, keeping the bottom outlets open just enough to murder the county and closed just enough to keep his castle standing under his feet. If I didn't give it up, if I fought, my daughter was 6 feet from a drawn gun in a concrete box. I looked at Pell. She was looking back at me, and she wasn't panicking. In the thin, hard line of light under the door, I could see her face, white and still. And I watched her do the thing I'd spent 16 years teaching her. She'd gone quiet, and she was listening to the machine, reading the whole situation for the give, for the one place where a stuck thing will move if you put your weight right. And her eyes flicked, just once, down and to her left, to the battery bank. I understood my daughter in that instant the way you understand someone you've spent their whole life teaching to read a failing pump. The battery bank, the sealed system that ran the alarm horn and the thin line of light under the door and every working volt in that gatehouse. Thoreau Vance's good engineering. And on the face of it, right where her eyes had gone, the main disconnect, the big red knife switch I'd thrown a dozen times during maintenance. The master cutoff that dropped the whole battery room, and everything it fed into total, instant, absolute dark. She was standing 18 inches from it. "Okay," I said to Sublett, and I made my voice break, made it shake, which wasn't hard, because part of it wasn't acting. "Okay, I'm setting it down. Just don't point that thing at her. Please, I'm setting it down right now." I started to crouch, my hands going slow to the shotgun sling, every line of my body the line of a beaten man giving up his last card. And I held Sublett's eyes the whole way down. Because a man watching your eyes and your hands isn't watching your daughter's hands. And I needed every second of his attention I could steal. "Quiet's the whole game," I said. It wasn't to him. Pell hit the disconnect. The battery room went black, true black. The absolute lightless black you only get underground or sealed inside concrete. The little green and amber charge lights gone. The hard line under the door gone, everything gone at once. And in the same half-second, the alarm horn on the roof, which Roe must have left armed for one more sweep, died at its source, and from beyond the door, I heard Rose's rough voice break off mid-word and rise in confusion. And the radio voice asked, "What the hell just happened?" I was already moving. In the dark, I knew that room, and Sublett didn't. I'd crossed it 10,000 times with my eyes on a clipboard. I went left and down, dropping under the line where his gun had been. And I got a hand on the barrel of that Glock and shoved it up and away from where my daughter had been standing. And it went off. God in heaven. In that sealed concrete box, the shot was the loudest thing I have ever heard or will ever hear. A white spike of muzzle flash and a flat slamming concussion that took my hearing down, in an instant, to a high, thin ringing whine. The world gone silent and screaming at once. But the muzzle flash showed me his face for the length of a heartbeat, close, twisted. And I'd boxed a little as a young man in a county league that doesn't exist anymore. And I'd swung a maul and a sledge my whole working life. And I drove my forehead into the bridge of his nose with everything I had in my legs and back. I felt it give under the bone of my skull. A wet crunch I felt more than heard. He went down and back into the battery rack, and I went down on top of him in the black, and I got both my hands on the gun and twisted it the way you twist a frozen valve stem against the thumb, against the weak joint, using the whole arm, and it tore free of his grip. And I came up onto my knee with my weight on his chest and the muzzle jammed up under the soft of his jaw. "Pell!" I couldn't hear my own voice, just felt it in my throat. "The hatch, now! Dad!" Her voice came to me thin and far through the ringing. "The hatch! I'm right behind you!" Under me, Sublett was choking, a wet bubbling sound, his hands scrabbling weak at my arms. From beyond the door, light bloomed sudden a flashlight, swinging. And Rose's voice, closer now, calling Sublett's name once, sharp, and the door handle turned. I had a choice again, and this one I made in less time than it takes to tell. I could pull the trigger and end the man under me, and the shot would tell Roe through the door exactly where we were and how many, and that one of us was armed and desperate. Or I could leave him. I left him. I cracked the heavy steel grip of the Glock across his temple, hard once, and felt him go slack under me. And I rolled off him toward the gray rectangle of starlight, where Pell had the maintenance hatch open. And the control room door swung wide, and a flashlight beam stabbed into the battery room, and swept across the racks, and found the empty floor, and the slumped shape of Roseman, bleeding among the batteries, and not us. Because we were already through the hatch and out into the night on the downstream face of the dam, into the wind and the spray, and the endless shuddering hum of the dying machine. We came out 190 feet up, on the open downstream face, with Rose's men waking behind us and the east stair our only way down. "They'll be on the stair," Pell gasped. And her voice was coming back to me now, through the ringing, breathless and fast. "The patrol, they'll come down the stair to cut us off." "Then we don't take the stair." I'd lied to her, a little in that instant, not with words, but by leaving something out. There was another way down, and I'd known it from the moment we started up. And I hadn't said it because it was the kind of way down a man doesn't mention until he absolutely has to. The downstream face of Hargrove wasn't smooth all the way across. At the east end, near the Gatehouse, there was the Spillway chute, a broad concrete stairway built into the face, each step 4 feet high. A giant staircase meant to carry overflow water down in a thundering cascade during a real flood without tearing the dam apart. In a true flood, those steps were a churning white death. But tonight, with the spillway gates shut and only the bottom outlets running, The spillway face was dry, just wet with mist and spray. And it was a brutal, bruising, leg-jarring climb down, survivable. If you didn't fall, if you didn't slip on the wet concrete in the dark, if your knees held through 190 feet of 4-foot drops. The spillway steps, I said. We go down the face. Now, while they still think we're on the stair. Behind us, the gatehouse door banged open onto the crest, and flashlight beams stabbed out into the dark. And swung wild across the downstream face, and Calvin Rowe's rough voice, finally clear of the door, roared out into the night over the wind and the water. They're outside, east face. Find them now. We went over the edge onto the first spillway step. I won't pretend it was anything but terrible. 4-foot drops in the dark, wet concrete under bare feet, the spray off the falling outlet release making every surface slick as oiled glass. My daughter and me lowering ourselves down the giant stair step by steps, sit on the lip, swing the legs, drop and catch, find the footing, do it again down the shuddering face of a structure I could feel dying through the palms of my hands. That bad cavitation tremor coming up out of the concrete and into my wrists and arms with every drop, telling me the throat of the dam was still being chewed away by the outlets I had not shut and now never would. Because I'd failed at the one thing I'd climbed up there to do. I want to be honest about that, plain, the way I've tried to be honest about all of it. I had climbed that dam to close the bottom outlets and save the valley, and instead I'd walked my daughter into a baited trap, fought my way out by the thin skin of my teeth and a 16-year-old's hand on a knife switch. And now I was climbing down the back of the thing without having laid a single finger on a single valve. The outlets were still wide open. The throat was still cavitating. Somewhere above us, Rose still held the control room. And Vance, and Vance's girl, and the machine was still dying under all of them. And I had made it worse, not better, because now they were awake and hunting, and the clock hadn't slowed by 1 second. Halfway down, on one of the wider steps, Pell stopped me with a hand flat on my chest. Above us, the flashlight beams were working the east stair Sublett's lie, the one true thing he'd given them by accident, was buying us the only time we had, sending Rose's men down the steel switchback where we weren't. The beam swept the empty grating in the dark, 100 feet over our heads. Dad. She had to put her mouth right at my ear over the wind and the water. She was crying now. I could feel it, but steady, the way her mother used to cry when she'd already decided something and the tears were just the body catching up. You can't fix it from down here. I know. The dam. You came up here to shut the valves. If it breaks. I know, Pell. Then we have to be the warning. Her voice was fierce and low and certain. We can't shut it off. But we can be the thing that gets the rest of them off the valley floor before it goes. The holdouts, the living ones still out there in the dark. If the dam breaks, they don't get a stair. They don't get spillway steps. They're just in the water with no warning at all. We can't save the machine, but we could be the horn. And there it was. The thing I should have seen myself and hadn't. Because I'd been thinking like an engineer the whole night, find the valve, fix the machine, save the structure while my 16-year-old daughter, hanging off the wet face of a dying dam in the dark, saw clear past all of it to the thing that actually mattered. The machine was lost. Rowe had it, and the throat was too far gone for my 2 hands, and no time. And there was no version of the night where I got back up into that control room, past awake and armed men, and reversed hours of cavitation damage with a wrench. The dam was going to break. The only open question was whether the valley below it died asleep or died running. But the alarm The real alarm. The horn. The very thing this whole long nightmare turned on that had never truly been Rose. He'd stolen it and bent it into a lure. Used the valley's own warning system against the valley. Turned salvation into bait. And we'd just killed it at the source, throwing that disconnect to save our own 2 lives. We could turn it back into what it was built to be. The horn runs off the battery room, I said slowly. The plan assembling itself the way they always do once you stop fighting the problem and start listening to it. We cut it at the disconnect, Pell. You cut it. But the horn doesn't come back on by itself when the power comes back. Because the automatic trigger's tied to a water level the lake's already passed and held. The thing that turns it on now is the manual button, the hand switch in the battery room. So somebody throws the disconnect to bring the power back, and somebody holds that button down. And not for 30 seconds, not Rose's little lure. Continuous. The real flood signal, the long, unbroken scream. The one everybody in this valley grew up doing tornado drills to, the one that means run, not gather. Long enough that every living soul on that valley floor understands it for what it is and gets to high ground before the water comes. They'll know exactly where we are, Pell said. The second the horn comes back on, they'll know we never left the gatehouse. Yes. And it'll bring the herd, every one of them, off the road and off the farms, straight at the noise, straight at the gatehouse. Yes. I held my daughter's wet face in both my hands, there on the side of the dam, the wind tearing at us, the structure shuddering under us. Which is why only one person can go back up to throw it and hold it. And the other one goes down to the causeway, into the East Cable Tunnel, the dry one. The maintenance run that goes through the rock of the abutment and comes out in the yard on the back side of the ridge, above the flood line, and waits there, out of the water, out of their sight, until it's over. She understood me before I'd finished the sentence. No. Pell, no. You are not sending me down a tunnel to wait in the dark for you to die holding a button. No. I want to tell you I overruled her with a father's authority. That I made the decision the way a father's supposed to, and she obeyed. The truth is I couldn't. And the truth is worse and better than that. She was right about the thing that mattered. A 16-year-old who could read a dying machine and find the one switch that mattered and throw it under a drawn gun in the dark was not a person I got to treat like cargo anymore. She'd earned her place in the decision the same way I'd taught her to earn everything by being right. By being able, by keeping her head when keeping it cost everything. So I gave her the real math instead. The cold version. The one I'd have wanted from my own father, who never once lied to me to make a hard thing softer. Somebody holds that horn down until the valley floor's clear, I said. Then they run. But the horn brings Rose men. And worse than that, it brings the herd. And the herd doesn't think and doesn't stop and doesn't get tired. Whoever holds that button is going to end up standing in a concrete room with one door and 100 dead things climbing the dam toward the only sound left in the world. It's a job for one person. And it's a job where the one person most likely does not come back down. And it is not going to be you. Not because you can't do it, you could do it better than me. Because you're 16. And because I made your mother a promise. And because I'm the one who trusted Sublett on that road and walked us into this. And a man pays for his own mistakes. Not his daughter. She was quiet a long moment. The wind howling up the face, the dam shuddering under both our hands, the flashlight beam sweeping the wrong stair above us. There's a third way, she said. Pell, you taught me this. Her voice steadied. Found the flat, certain tone she got when she'd worked a problem through to the end. When a system's failing and there's no good option, you don't just pick the least bad one and eat the cost. You change the system. The horn needs the button held down, but it doesn't need a hand the whole time, does it? It just needs the circuit closed. And you can close a circuit with something that isn't a hand. You wedge it. You jam the button down so it holds itself, and you walk away. And the horn keeps screaming, with nobody standing there to die for it. I stared at my daughter in the dark, the spray running down both our faces. She was right. She was exactly, completely right. And I'd been too deep in the picture of my own noble death to see it. The horn's manual trigger was a momentary switch, a big mushroom head button, spring-loaded, that you pressed and held. The horn sounded while you held it and stopped the instant you let go. I'd held it down myself, dozens of times during the annual tests, standing there with my thumb on it for the full duration while the engineers timed the decibels. And a momentary switch could be wedged. A length of stiff wire, a piece of conduit, a wrench laid across the button and braced against the guard, anything to hold that contact mechanically closed. Throw the disconnect to restore the power, jam the button down to hold the horn, and run both of us down the cable tunnel, through the rock, out the back, above the flood, gone, while the horn screamed the true warning across the whole drowning valley, with nobody standing under it at all. The herd would come to the sound. Rose's men would come to the sound. And they'd find a screaming horn in an empty battery room, and a dam shuddering itself apart under all of them. And we'd be a quarter-mile away through solid rock, climbing toward the ridge. "The tunnel," I said. "We both go up. We both throw the disconnect. We jam the horn, and we both go down the cable tunnel. Both of us." "Both," she said. "Both." We climbed back up the dam. I won't draw it out, because there's a particular horror in doing a desperate thing twice. In climbing back up toward the lights and the guns you just bled to escape, that doesn't get any better for the telling. We went back up the spillway steps in the dark, harder going up than down, hauling ourselves over each 4-foot lip with arms gone shaky from the descent, with Rose's flashlight still working the wrong side of the dam, the steel stair on the far face. We reached the crest at the gatehouse end and slipped along the downstream foundation in its deeper dark, back to the maintenance hatch. And I went in first this time, through the low steel opening, with Sublett's Glock in my hand. 15 rounds, more or less. A round already spent in the dark, real 9mm stopping power, far more than my 19 shells of buckshot would ever give me in a tight room. And I'd take it and be glad. The battery room was still black. Sublett was still down where I'd left him, against the rack, breathing in wet, ragged pulls, his blood gone black in the gray light bleeding through the cracked hatch. From beyond the interior door came voices, and the swing of flashlight beams under the gap. Rowe had pulled men back inside, regrouping, the light flickering with their movement. They knew now that the disconnect had been thrown by hand. They just didn't know we'd come back to throw it again. I found the disconnect by feel, the big red knife switch on its panel, exactly where my hand remembered it. And beside it on the wall, in its little wire guard cage, the horn's manual trigger, the mushroom button I'd held down a dozen times in another life, in another world, when the worst thing on a test day was bad coffee. And from my jacket pocket I pulled the one tool I'd carried out of my drowned house without quite knowing why I'd grabbed it. A 6-inch adjustable wrench, worn smooth, because a man who fixes things does not leave the house without one, not even at the end of the world. "Ready," I breathed to Pell. She was at the hatch, half out into the night, the way down already under her, exactly where I needed her to be, closest to the exit, first out. "Ready." I threw the disconnect. The battery lights bloomed back green and amber, the hard line of light returning under the door, and beyond it, I heard Rose's voice sharpen and rise. because they'd have seen their panel come alive, seen the power return, known in that instant that somebody was in the battery room with them, on the other side of the door. I jammed the wrench through the wire guard and laid it across the mushroom button and levered the button down and braced the wrench against the frame of the guard, wedging it, and I leaned my weight on it to seat it hard. And the horn on the roof, 18 inches of concrete and steel above our heads, came alive. I have heard loud things in my life. I have stood next to running turbines and pile drivers in a freight train at a grade crossing. I have never heard anything like that horn from inside the building that held it. It wasn't a sound so much as a force, a solid wall of it that came down through the concrete and into my chest and stopped the breath in my lungs. And it did not stop, and it would not stop, because the button was wedged and the battery was full, and the dead Cajun who built it had built the thing to scream until the water dropped or the world ended. The real alarm. The one the valley was supposed to hear. The one that meant run. The control room door flew open, and Calvin Rowe filled it. The big gray-bearded man with a hunting rifle coming up in his hands and a rage in his face that had nothing human left behind it. And behind him, 2 more men, with flashlights and long guns, and for one frozen, strobing instant in the dark, with the horn screaming through the concrete around all of us. We saw each other plain. I fired 3 rounds of 9mm into the doorframe beside his head. Not at him. At the frame, at the splintering concrete and steel 8 inches from his face, because I wanted them down and back, not dead. And because every round I had was still a decision. And 3 rounds spent to drive 3 armed men into cover was a far better trade than emptying a magazine into 1 man and bringing the other 2 and all their bullets down on my daughter in a sealed room. The shots cracked white in the dark and chewed the door frame, and Rowe and his men recoiled back into the control room. And in the half-second of cover that bought, I shoved Pell out through the hatch ahead of me and went through after her, out into the screaming night on the downstream face. And we went for the causeway and the cable tunnel, with the horn shaking the air and the dam shuddering under our feet, and 190 feet below, on the drowned floor of the valley, the whole road herd of the dead turning, slow and patient and certain, away from the dam's far end, and toward the one true sound left in all the world. The east cable tunnel runs 400 feet through the solid rock of the abutment, from a hatch at the base of the dam to the maintenance yard on the back side of the ridge, above the flood line. It's dry, low, lined with conduit and cable tray, and I'd crawled it more times than I could count, pulling sensor wire, chasing faults, cursing the backache of it. It was the one piece of the dam Calvin Rowe didn't know existed. Because it wasn't on any drawing he'd have found in that control room, it had been a field modification, never properly drafted. Thoreau Vance's own quiet good work from 20 years back. A dry path so a maintenance man could get from the yard to the gatehouse without crossing the exposed crest in a storm. A kindness built into concrete. The kind of thing a careful man does without being asked. We made the causeway hatch with the horn shaking the air and the spray soaking us and Rowe's men spilling out onto the crest above. Their flashlights stabbing down at the stair and the spillway steps where we no longer were. We hauled the tunnel hatch open and dropped down into the dark, dry throat of the rock. And I pulled it shut behind us, and the horn's scream became a muffled, endless, bone-deep drone through the stone. And we crawled. We crawled 400 feet in absolute dark, the dam shuddering through the rock all around us. And I'll tell you the one thing I thought about. Crawling. Because it's the thing I most want to leave you with. I thought about how close I'd come to being Calvin Rowe's tool. How a man who knows the inside of the machine is exactly the man the Roes of the world go hunting when their stolen machine starts to die under them. Sublett hadn't lured me with a gun or a threat. He'd lured me with my own competence, the same way Roe held Vance with Vance's own daughter and held the whole herd with its own hunger by finding the truest, deepest thing in a man and turning it into a hook. My competence, the thing I'd been quietly proud of my whole life. The thing that drained the rain barrels and oiled the hinge and read the cavitation in the throat that had been the very bait in the trap. The most dangerous thing about me that night had turned out to be the thing I trusted most about myself. And I thought about Pell, crawling ahead of me in the black, who had seen clear past all of that to the thing I couldn't. That you don't always get to fix the machine. Sometimes the machine is lost. Sometimes the only thing left to you is to take the enemy's lie and turn it back into the truth it was stolen from, to make the lure a warning again. And then to get the people you love out the back way, down the dry tunnel, above the flood line, alive, while the thing you couldn't save tears itself apart in the dark behind you. We came out of the cable tunnel into the maintenance yard on the back of the ridge a little after 1 a.m. 400 feet of solid rock between us and the dam now. The horn still screaming, faint and steady and faithful, over the top of the ridgeline. From the yard, the old logging spur climbed away up toward the east ridge, 1,500 feet above the valley floor, true high ground. The ground I'd meant for us from the very start, before any of it. We climbed it. We climbed it in the dark, with our legs gone to water and our feet cut and our hearing still ringing. And from the top of it, with the dawn still hours off, we turned and looked back down at Hargrove and the valley. And we watched the horn do its work. The road herd had reversed. Every infected the flood had funneled up toward the north end was now climbing the dam itself, drawn to the screaming horn up the steel stair, up the spillway steps, a slow, patient tide of the dead pouring onto the structure from below. While Roe's men fought them on the crest, the flashlights up there had become muzzle flashes, a frantic stuttering strobe in the dark as Calvin Roe's stolen kingdom learned, too late, that you cannot ring a dinner bell for the dead all night long and expect to keep your castle. And the holdouts, the living, the families hiding in the high farms, the handful of people Roe had meant to drown in their beds and their barns, they had heard the real alarm. From the ridge we could see headlights now, here and there across the dark valley. Vehicles moving, all of them moving the same way. Toward high ground, away from the river, the way you move when a flood horn means flood and not gather. The lie had become the truth again. The horn that had been bait was a warning once more. And people who should have died running the wrong way were climbing toward the dark ridges all around us, alive. The dam went at 3:48 a.m. I know, because my father's watch was still keeping honest time on my wrist, the only honest clock left in the valley to the very end. It didn't fail the way the movies fail, all at once, a clean, dramatic collapse. It failed the way a real thing fails. The cavitated throat let go, first a deep, concussive boom that we felt come up through 1,500 feet of ridge into the soles of our cut bare feet from a mile away. Then a long, tearing, grinding groan as the arch lost its footing, and the east abutment shifted, and the whole geometry of held force came undone. And then the water found the wound and made it bigger and bigger, and the entire north end of the valley went white in the dark as 9 billion gallons came through all at once. It took the Gatehouse. It took the Crest Road and the Horn and Roe and Vance and Sublett and all of it, the kingdom and the castle and the wall and the dinner bell in about 90 seconds. The horn cut off mid-note the way it had cut off at 11:22, hours and a lifetime ago. Only this time, because the building that held it had ceased, in an instant, to exist. I held my daughter on the East Ridge, and we watched the valley we'd lived in our whole lives fill up white and disappear under the water. And around us in the dark, the survivors gathered, the living ones, the ones the real alarm had saved, drawn up to the high ground by the sound, and now standing in twos and threes in the dark, looking down at where their homes had been. And nobody said anything for a long time, because there was nothing left to say that the water wasn't already saying for us, plainer than any words. I never found out if Thoreau Vance's daughter got out. I've made my peace with not knowing, the way you make your peace with a lot of things after a night like that. I like to think the old Cajun, who built the horn right 20 years ago and the dry tunnel that saved us, found some way at the very end to use his own good work to get his girl down a back way, into the dark, above the line. But I don't know, and I'm done pretending I know things just to make the not knowing easier to carry. Here's what I do know, and it's the only thing I've got worth handing on. A man named Calvin Rowe stole a valley's alarm and turned it into a lure, and it very nearly worked. Because the most dangerous lies are the ones built out of something true. He nearly got me with my own competence, the same way he got Vance with his own daughter and the herd with its own hunger. He found the truest thing in every one of us and bent it into a hook. But an alarm is just a sound. It doesn't mean run, and it doesn't mean gather. It means whatever the hand on the trigger means it to mean. And in the end, the hand on the trigger was a 51-year-old maintenance man and his 16-year-old daughter jamming a $6 wrench through a switch guard in the dark, turning a lie back into a warning, and walking out the back way through the rock while the kingdom drowned. We live on the East Ridge now, the ones who came up out of the valley that night. It's not much. It's high ground and hard ground, and we work it with our hands. Pell's 17 now, and she can read a failing generator faster than I can. And she still won't let me treat her like cargo, and she is right not to. And I've stopped trying. Sometimes, late, when the wind comes up the draw a certain way off the new lake, I'd swear I hear that horn again, faint and steady over the water that covers everything we used to be. I know it isn't real. The horn's 190 feet down under cold black water now, with Rowe in his castle and the chewed-out throat of the dam he killed. But I listen for it anyway, because that's the thing nobody tells you about surviving. You spend the rest of your life listening for the sound that means run, and praying that the next time you hear it, the hand on the trigger belongs to somebody who's telling you the truth. If you made it all the way down the valley with me tonight, thank you for staying. I've wondered for a long time whether I made the right call trusting Sublett on that dark road, or going up that dam at all instead of just running for the ridge with my girl while we had the chance. So if you've got a verdict, leave it down in the comments and tell me where you're listening from tonight, because I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. And if grounded survival stories like this one are your kind of thing, you already know where to find the rest of them. Keep your watch honest. Keep your exits dry. And when the alarm sounds, be sure you know whose hand is on the trigger.